This is TWiT.
So the joint Apple-Google virus contact tracing that was our main focus 2 weeks ago has been gaining traction, I'm glad to say. There are some organizations, some state actors, some countries that have indicated that they're going to adopt it as opposed to their own ad hoc, I just think, thank goodness, because that's one of the big benefits of there being an established platform.
I agree. I was talking about this earlier. Australia's trying something that's terrible. France is pissed at Apple because they said, you won't give us the data. It's clear that Apple and Google have got it together compared to these. Yeah. And we've seen what happens when government tries to do technology. Right. Famously in this country, despite all of the technology and lots of money, what was the health system that tried to switch on and was a complete disaster? Obama's Obamacare. Yeah.
Obamacare.
The ACA.
My Lord.
But, there was a good ending to that story. A lot of times people talk about that and, the billion-dollar health. But what happened was a bunch of coders from Silicon Valley got together and the United States Digital Service was born. And they made a much better site. And as a result, you've got some really competent people. Matt Cutts is their administrator. Doing stuff like for the Veterans Administration and other websites. And these government websites, they really do need to be updated. As you know, that's the one reason TLS 1.2 won't die.
Well, exactly. And this sort of speaks to the point, which is there are some things you don't want to have amateurs do. It's just like, okay, step away from the computer. We don't want you to try to home roll your own contact tracing system that feeds up to Big Brother. So the idea that quickly, as I said, this week we're supposed to have this in beta from Apple and Google.
Today, I think, supposedly.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's heading these independent efforts off at the pass, which is where they need to go to die. Is like, okay, just stay away. So, I'm already on record saying that based on my reading of the technology, which I shared with our listeners 2 weeks ago, I believe that the system is clearly and cleverly designed to achieve its stated goal of allowing someone who's chosen to use this system to obtain a notification if they were probably in proximity, both in space and time, to another user of the system during a time when that other user may have been contagious with this novel coronavirus. And most importantly, this system enables this minimal service while providing maximal protection of the privacy of all participants, which is why I looked at it and it passed muster. Okay, so as we know, they're on schedule to be providing an initial beta, as you said today. Last Friday, they disclosed a number of changes they were making. They said to further enhance the system's existing privacy protections and accuracy. It's like, okay. Well, so we'll look at those. What are there? There's 8 of them. So first, the term contact tracing has been changed to exposure notification, which Apple and Google feel better describes the functionality of the API. That's it. That's what they're actually offering is exposure notification, which I think is accurate. They said the system may also not stand alone. While it is intended to notify a person of potential exposure, it may be used to augment broader contact tracing efforts that public health authorities are planning. So again, that sort of reminds us that this is an API. That's actually something, I'll expand on this a little bit in a minute, that makes me uncomfortable, because what you build on top of it could still be doing evil, even if it's on top of this API. And so the fact that they're not offering turnkey apps that I would also tend to trust is a bit of a problem. Anyway, the second point, they said keys will now be randomly generated rather than derived from a temporary tracing key, making it more difficult for someone to guess how the keys are derived and use that information to try and track people. Okay, that is utter nonsense. But okay, maybe, someone in, somewhere else raised their hand and said, I don't know what HMAC means. Could you just make them random? Because I don't know what HBAC means. And so someone at Google and Apple probably just looked at each other and said, yeah, okay, fine. It's like it doesn't really matter. It means that rather than storing one secret from which you are able to rederive the keys from the past, that, again, there's nothing wrong with that. That was perfect. But I don't know what HMAC means. Okay, fine. So, third point, Bluetooth metadata will be encrypted, making it more difficult for someone to try and use that information to identify a person. I think that sounds like a great enhancement. Bravo. So good. Encrypt your Bluetooth metadata. Fourth point, exposure time will be recorded in 5-minute intervals with the maximum exposure reported capped at 30 minutes. Okay, not a biggie, slightly more granular, so a little bit of a privacy enhancement. You're not sure. Was it 7? Was it 8? Nope, we're even going to tell you it was 5 or 10, and we're not going to tell you if they were there longer than 30. So, okay, I can, you could, if there wasn't a cap, you could imagine how you could make an inference if it was like a long exposure, then it's like, oh, I know who that had to be. So, fine. Fifth point, the API will include information about the power level of the Bluetooth signal in the data that is exchanged between phones. This can be used in conjunction with RSSI, that's the received signal strength indication, to more accurately estimate the distance between two phones when contact was made. And I think that's very clever. That's, so the point is the beacon that is sent will also include its transmitted power level so that the receiver can incorporate that along with the received power that its own receiver gets in order to make a better judgment. That's brilliant. Whoever added that, bravo. Sixth point, Apple and Google will allow developers to specify signal strength and duration thresholds for exposure events. In other words, maybe that was originally just going to they were going to do that and decide how long and how strong and what the bar was that you had to clear in order to decide that the phones were close enough to relate to viral exposure. Now that'll be a parameter in the API. Okay, fine. Seventh point, the API will now allow for determining the number of days since the last exposure event to better determine what actions the user should take next. Okay, that's a nice enhancement. I guess that means that information will be available in the API. Previously, everybody would be checking daily to check to see whether they received any keys that indicated that the people had been near them. Now there'll be an explicit when was this exposure event, that'll be added to the data flow. So cool. And lastly, the API's encryption algorithm is switched from HMAC to AES. They said many devices have built-in hardware for accelerating AES encryption, so this change should help performance and efficiency on phones. That's also total nonsense. The difference in power, in electrical power, for the minuscule amount of data involved in doing AES with hardware acceleration versus HMAC, pales in comparison to having your screen turned on. I mean, that's complete nonsense, but okay, fine. Again, we want this to be adopted. So by all means, again, I don't know what HBAC means. Fine. AES, everybody knows that's, encryption good. So it's in there. So we're in a weird position here. Everyone is talking about the critical need for contact tracing. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo is planning to hire and train up a major human force to pursue old school pencil and paper contact tracing. Maybe it'll be augmented with this. Maybe this is where you start, then you follow up with people. I mean, like if you are told you are near somebody through the technology, then you call a hotline, and then someone comes out and interviews you. Who knows how this is going to go? It's going to be interesting to see how this whole thing fares. But we do have technology now in it, to augment traditional pre-technology contact tracing. Most people have smartphones that are rarely out of their reach, and Bluetooth is well suited to allowing those phones to sense one another's proximity in time and distance. So at the minimum, there's an intriguing possibility for automating at least some of this contact tracing challenge. As I said before we began recording, Leo, I kind of think the whole issue doesn't make much sense to me. What we're learning is that this virus is already everywhere, and the only way, as I've said before, the only way that the numbers we're seeing make sense is that it is pernicious. I mean, New York is still under a complete lockdown, yet they're guessing that they managed to push the R0 in full lockdown to 0.8 in one region of New York and 0.9 in another. So in lockdown, just barely below 1, which is where it needs to be. So I guess, to me, this feels a little bit like the magnetometers that we all now have to walk through at the airport because of 9/11. But, fine. That's another discussion. People appear to think this will be useful, and I salute Apple and Google for so quickly offering a technological foundation and offering like a truly good solution, which is what I'm sure it is. But as the saying goes, it's complicated. And as many of those who are opining on this complex technical issue and presumably being read by those looking for some guidance, unfortunately, they're getting important facts very wrong. For example, I have seen since this announcement, Wired wrote, quote, "Even if the keys that the app uploads to a server cannot identify someone, they could, for instance, be linked with the IP addresses of the phones that upload them. That would let whoever runs that server, most likely a government healthcare agency, identify the phones of people who report as positive and thus their locations and identities." Except no. We know that's nonsense because cellular phone IPs are extremely ephemeral. And in fact, that's exactly the word Microsoft Research used in a paper exploring the feasibility of geolocating cellular phones by IP. They wrote, quote, "In this study, we show that the reasons for geolocation inaccuracy are twofold. First, cell phone IPs are ephemeral, changing rapidly across HTTP requests. As a result, each queried service observes a different IP address for the same device, even though the queries are executed in quick succession within a span of 5 to 10 minutes, unquote. So again, here's Wired scaring people incorrectly. And the Brookings Institution, in their piece titled, and they really didn't like this at all, titled "Contact Tracing Apps Are Not a Solution to the COVID-19 Crisis." They wrote, "Some of the contact tracing frameworks have been designed with security and privacy in mind to some degree." Well, how refreshing. They said, the Apple-Google proposal, for example, stores the information about what contacts the device has made on each user's device, rather than reporting that information to a central server, as is the case with some of the other approaches. Okay, well, that's not true. Then they go on. This decentralized architecture isn't completely free of privacy and security concerns, however, and actually opens apps based on these APIs to new and different classes of privacy and security vulnerabilities. For example, because contact tracing apps constantly broadcast health status in connection with a unique, if rotating, identifier, it is possible to correlate infected people with their pictures using a stationary camera connected to a Bluetooth device in a public place. And that, of course, is absolute, utter nonsense. As we know, the smartphones are not broadcasting a beacon declaring that its owner has been infected with the coronavirus, so stay clear. But unfortunately, because the way the system does work is complicated, and few people outside this podcast apparently have any idea how it actually does work, the public's natural and healthy skepticism is being primed to say no thanks. And I know, Leo, you agree that having that happen would be unfortunate. So, we understand that what Apple and Google have created is a solid platform which strongly encourages and enables the creation of secure and private contact tracing apps. Could individual apps built on this API work hard to subvert the system by adding the user's identity to the uploaded reports? Yes, of course. And, this is why I so strongly wish that Apple and Google were going further and were themselves providing the turnkey apps that run atop those APIs. Would I be surprised if the Chinese government's apps running on top of this API did not also embed their citizens' identity into the uploaded content? Of course not. None of us would. But that's not the API's fault, and it's not even theoretically possible to prevent that from being done by any untrustworthy app. So yeah, the stakes are high and everyone is freaked out right now. And at the very least, what we've got is a very good start. Virus researchers and epidemiologists are telling us that this will probably not be the last such pandemic we encounter in our lifetimes. Hopefully we'll all be around. Well, yeah. Hopefully it's a ways off and we'll also still be around for it. But having this extremely well-designed contact tracing platform in place today, for whatever good it may do now, is probably equipping us to better handle the next one. We've heard that both Apple and Google intend to submerge this into the OS, which says, great, it'll be there next time. We know that Apple has a strong interest in leveraging their iDevices to improve personal health. It would make a lot of sense for a future iOS, iPad OS, and Watch OS to natively incorporate Apple's Apple's own trusted and trustworthy contact tracing app. It would sit there unused, but ready for next time. So maybe. So, they're moving forward. It'll be fun for them to release something, and I'm glad that they did it quickly so that app developers can jump on it and And let's cross our fingers that they follow the clear intent that the API has of honoring people's privacy. Maybe there'll be some open source apps that will get adopted, in which case they could be audited and we'll be able to see, what's inside and what they're doing. That would be good.